What's up, amigos? Commander Hammer here today. We're going to go over a deck profile, specifically Luard Premium. This is the deck list that the EU champion Karan Patel actually took to the whole event and got first place. So what I really want to do with this deck profile is kind of go over some of the intricacies that I had with the interview article that I had with him. So if you want to see the interview article, it's also in the description below too, and you can click and see that. But I also want to give some perspective in that regards and some of his thoughts and some of his answers too within this deck profile, so you guys can get a chance why he built this, and at the same time for you guys to try out as well. So let's get right into it. Real quick sponsorship note: Next Level Gaming had the November playmat, as you can see, with Brent Gay with Dimension Police signed with it. It's really cool with the prison units too as well, so I definitely highly recommend get your playmat as soon as possible. This is a limited time as well. And with the upcoming December playmat, as you can see, it will be lyrical units as well with the Christmas theme behind it. Obviously, it's still a work in progress, but this is more to come as well. And again, the link to the store is actually at my description with the affiliated link, or you can go to the website and use my Commander Jaime discount promo to get a 10% discount on your next order. So as we can see, he is playing the Drag for Luard, and so there are different Luard versions such as the V series that give you force markers. He decided to go with Dragfall, and it's the 11 kg era version. And it's a really good card in a sense, and what it does is that with the Ritual X ability, depending on how many great ones you have in the drop zone, you can decrease the cost by a counterblast. And initially it's 4 counterblasts, which seems like a lot, but it's really easy to get a grade ones into the drop zone to lower that into free, and it's essentially bottom decking a card to either stride or ultimate stride. And so really what that does, it gives you consistency of able to stride without having to discard. And it's really cool because it's the only grade 3 in the main deck as well that is actually the main unit that you want to ride with. There is the grade 3 Heal Guardians, as we can see, so I'll talk about a little bit about that too. And it's just a very good consistent card because when you stride as well, you can counterblast one and search for a grade 1, then call it to Rearguard Circle. And if it was a ritual card, you can actually just retire something in the same column, which gives you some board control in that sense too. But there's plenty of cards that you can choose from to be able to like capitalize that, and if you do so happen to call ritual grade 1, you have access to retire, which is kind of nice to get rid of problem cards such as Hanley and other cards that may be an issue in that regard. And what really came up was his matchup with the Narukami, specifically Eradicators. And so there's this card that stays on the board that helps bind more cards, and so he was using Luard's skill to call that grade 1 ritual to retire that and consistently go from there, so he has some presence of control and able to get the temple. And it's just really more consistent overall with this grade 3 Luard. And when you're going into the best of one, even himself realized that as long as I take the most consistent deck, I should do pretty well and get into top 8. And it really did him well to the point where he got first overall. So I think that was the best choice, and he really figured that out, and it was really cool just to see that it actually gave him the results that he wanted in that respect too. So onto the grade 2s, we see that he's only playing a certain amount of grade 2s. There's 2 Leafall, 4 on Morion, and then 3 of the Dagda. And with Leafall, it's the one that counterblast one, search for any grade 1 and call it to an open Rearguard Circle, which is useful to call some key grade 1s, maybe in the main, such as for example, and then start doing the main shenanigans at that point. So you start building up that field presence. But the Morion Spear and the Dagda are the most important grade 2s, and Morion Spear is the one that lets you Soul Blast 1, discard a card, and draw another card. And so you can start discarding excess grade 1s, so it helps with that ritual count. It also gets power plus 5k, and depending on what you discarded, it gets 10k instead of that 5k, so it helps with that regard too. As a beater, it's a good target to use a stand trigger in case you drive check a stand trigger too, so it makes that pressure in the early game too helpful. And then of course that's why he's playing 4 copies of that. He just wanted to be able to see this card on his grade 2 turn, be able to use the skill and help with his drop zone count to make that ritual count, especially for that first stride Murfessa turn, which is really big for, you know, Luard players in general. And so we have Dagda over here. Dagda is GB5 or GB1 ritual 5 technically, and it enables you multi-attack. So you retire one of your grade 1s and call 2 grade 1s from deck, so that way in the Morfessa turn, maybe I should explain what the Morfessa turn even does for those people that don't know. And the Morfessa, it lets you basically give your front row plus 15k and crit as a blanket effect. And so the more attacks or the more new units show up in the middle of the battle phase, they all see that benefit. So that's why Dagda helps you with that multi-attack, but also having that plus crit and the 15k. And to add a spice to it, it forces your opponent to guard with 2 cards from hand at the same time. So it makes it really hard to guard that turn, and it's high crit pressure, high power too. It's just first strike, Murfessa could win games in most cases. That's how powerful it is, and that's why even a card like a Dagda is still relevant. And I think 3 copies is a sweet spot. It is a GB1 card technically, and honestly, you do want to see it in the Murfessa turn, but it kind of sucks if you do draw it early on and you're not able to use. You'd rather see Morion Spear or maybe your Leo Fall, for example, if you did see another grade 2 in that case. So I think that's a good ratio. And if you add that up, that's 6 plus 3, so that's 9 grade 2s. That's pretty small. I've seen a small list with like maybe like 10 grade 2s and once in a blue moon 8 grade 2s, but you always have that issue of G Assistant and of course not being able to use those pieces or seeing them unless you search for them too. So it's a pro and cons kind of thing, which kind of segues into the grade 1s. He has 19 grade 1s. I actually asked him in the interview article, why did you specifically count down to 19? And he even said 18 is a good ratio number. And he has another grade 0, the Ritual Forerunner, as well on top of that too. So it's just like, that's 20 cards that are grade 1 or less that are not triggers, which is kind of like, whoa, mind-blowing. But it makes sense in this deck because you can search for everything in the grade 1s and even 0s in this case. And with the first one, you see the 4 Sentinels, which is Ursa's, the PG Ritual. This bounces back and bottom decks another copy of itself, so you're recycling a PG and it bounces back to your hand on top of that. Really good PG, still used to this day in some Shadow Paladin decks. Definitely highly recommend that. And we got the Owl, the Abyssal Owl next to it, 2 copies. It's a 5k grade 1 that the main can target, call it, and then depending on the grades, if your Vanguards match up, you either play a Soul Blast or a Counter Blast to get a draw, which is super helpful. If you're both on grade 2 and this is call, you can Soul Blast the grade 1 that you rolled with, so that helps with the ritual count too, while building your hand and resources and your field at the same time. So power. Really nice setup. And then of course in the main next to it is 4 copies. Rested, grab a 5k unit for your deck and call it to an open rearguard circle. This builds up the field. This lets you ritual retire fodder for those stride turns, so that way you can just retire those grade 1s, and it adds to the ritual count as well on top of that. So the main's definitely for free. It's 4 copies. I highly recommend still in Luard. And then you got the Espada Dragon. This is helps where it's placed. You can search for a Claret or the Morion Spear, and then you mill the rest of the cards, which helps with the consistency of finding the Morion Spear. But you ultimately mill the rest of the cards, which can be your grade 1s and your your triggers, because Murfessa's other skill lets it pick up the triggers to count as grade 1s for that turn too. So it helps you get to that ritual 10, which Murfessa needs. So that's why the Espada Dragon is appreciated in this case. And I think, you know, playing a few copies just to help with that little boost of consistency is nice, so you don't have to like max out an Espada Dragon. But the card next to it is the brown one. That's the top 5 grade 3 searcher card that I think is very key, and he even explained to this, it helped with the consistency of 1, finding the drag for Luard that he really needed to ride. 2nd, get a grade 3 heal guardian in case he really needed it during that matchup, depending on what he was facing. And overall, it can be used as a beater or a big booster in those mid to late game scenarios too as well. So brown one is actually just very solid in that sense, and improving the consistency of the entire deck in general. Being able to ride and be able to defend well with the heal guardians is just very key, especially with this metagame. Even with my Regalia deck profile, I added Skull back into Regalia just to be able to search not only the Idrissils and Angelicas, but also the grade 3 heal guardians as well. Because going second against certain decks, it equals death. And so you want to increase your chances of survival in that case too. Next to the next row, we have the Charon, 2 copies. This is the unit that basically, if it's called by an ability from deck, you can actually Soul Blast 1 to countercharge, and it gets +3 to the end of the turn. So it's an 11k booster, which can help with make numbers. It's a decent attacker too in that case, depending on if you have a force marker or if your opponent's an 11k Vanguard still for some reason. Most people are using the B series cards, so it may not come up as often, but it's just a nice counter charger too, just to be able to access to. You can use the stride skill of Luard to call it, so you use a counter blast and then immediately just refund it in that case if you just need an extra body too. Hanali is really useful in this metagame because there are some decks that have a lot of rearguard attacks, so anything from the 5th battle and more, they have to pay an additional counter blast to be able to attack. So it helps against those decks too, so you can survive. What's really cool, it's a grade 1. So Luard can literally search it anytime he wants to from the deck, which is super key. And if it ends up in the damage zone, then you heal it into the drop zone. You can return it with Luard's stride skill and then search it again with the other stride skill in that sense. And then just like, oh, I have access to Hanali if it's in the drop zone and in the deck. So that's pretty cool. And we have the 2 Forerunners. Me and Sevilla started Forerunner. He just wanted to dig deeper into his deck, which is, matters. And if you have a ticket shield, great. You have the other Forerunner that can be called. It's a ritual one, so if it gets retired, you can countercharge basically, and it goes into soul. So it helps with those resources, especially if you think about like Morfessa. It'll counterblast to retire what you have, like 2 rear guards. It'll immediately refund that. So if you do have 1 counterblast and you do have this card, you can still use Dagda during the battle phase to be able to do that multi-attack from anywhere from 4 to 6 attacks, which can be the meaning of winning that game, actually. That's why that 1 counterblast and countercharging like just helps in general. The grade 3 heal guardians, I asked them to, like, did you ever like misroad or anything like that? That's almost like the most common fear with people. And I feel like, plus it's a defensive card, so you could just drop it and it just, you can make the best use out of it. And then also, like, you don't have to worry about getting grade stuck at that point. But he said he never misrode. So it was just like, he just either didn't have any grade 3s or he had the Luard, and that was it, which is great for him, Not many of us are fortunate in that case, but it's great that it worked out for him. And I do believe the grade 3 heals are very essential in both V Premium and Premium in most stacks. So I think this was a good choice for him on his part. The next card is the Crit, the Belial Owl. This is famous where you can retire it to draw a card. It helps build that massive hand. He only had it like 2. I think because it is a G era card, it's weaker at the sense you can search for it if you really do need that extra draw in that sense. And it's just an extra ritual card that you can use with in case you need to call it with like Luard skill and then pop something. You have the stand trigger, the Raven. This is famous because you can rest it on the field and then return it to the deck and then see the 2 top cards from the deck and then call them to rest if you want to. And what it really does is, 1, it returns a trigger back to deck. 2, it lets you build up a field more easily, so that way you can able to retire with Morfessa and other card effects too. And it's just nice because you never know, it may dig deeper to the grade 1s that you need and also trigger some skills and all that kind of jazz to be push further to maybe get to Ritual Trend with Morfessa. You may not be set up right away, and in that case you need to dig deeper with cards like Raven, for example, and then kind of go from there in that sense. We have the Overtrigger, so we're not playing Ultima. I think in this meta game, deciding between an Overtrigger and the Ultima, unless your deck's win con is mainly Ultima, I feel like 9 times out of 10 you're going to pick the Overtrigger for Cater Sectionary. It's so many benefits: defensiveness. If you do draw, it's 50k shield. If you drive check it, it's more drive checks to your regards. In the Morfessa turn, this is pretty nutty if you think about it. All of a sudden, you got a Dagda that can drive check a stand trigger, and then it stands like another unit. It's just more attacks or something. But just be mindful of the new ruling that if a rearguard stands by a stand trigger, it loses any drive checks that it may have in that regard. So just be mindful of that ruling. But it's just like more triggers, why not, in that sense. And then speaking with more triggers, we got the strike crits. So you may not have the Ritual 4, and that helps you also pay the cost of strike in that sense. And it's just more room at this point, so why not add the strike crits versus the ones that go into soul. I don't think Luard really has of a soul issue, so just being able to have the benefit of being able to strike in case you don't have that setup ritual to be able to, strike for free in a sense. It's helpful. And then lastly, we have the other stand trigger. I asked him in this particular stand trigger why this guy, and it was really just having another stand trigger to be able to drive check, so you can easily get to 6 attacks in Morfessa by drive checking a stand trigger. That increases that odds, and it does have a skill that you can help filter a little bit with your hand, your deck a bit too, so that can be some merit in that case. But it's really the drive check, so you can get more likelihood of more attacks during that turn. And we got to the G zone. So obviously Morfessa is the key winning image to this deck, and there's 3 copies. He mentioned that he actually went into the 3rd Morfessa, and one of his matchups, it was just a back and forth. I think it was with DP, because he said he forgot that Geoma Glass gives power and shield to like the grade 3s on field, which I forget sometimes myself too. So he may have thought he had game, but then all of a sudden he couldn't finish it, and then I guess that's where the 3rd Morfessa showed up the next turn in that sense too. And especially since it got reprinted, you can pick these up relatively cheap too. We got the Jolito G-Guardian. It flips. It helps you build up to the flip fodder. I don't know if he has any card that helps. Well, maybe the Abyss Dragon or the Spectral Blaster. But anyway, with this allows you to move grade 1s to help defensive wise as well. And then you got the Dark Veil G-Guard. This one's really cool, especially that every 2 grade 1s you have in drop, it gets plus 5k shield. So if you have a lot of grade 1s, this gets really big. Like, it's just really nice. I'm surprised he's actually playing one, but I'm sure he had to fit some stuff. But at the same time, if he's going into first stride, and that's usually how the game ends, then maybe he doesn't need the second one in that case. The Drag Abyss. So there's 3 copies in here. One of its skills lets its Soul Blast to flip a copy and grab 2 grade 1s. The second skill though is a Ritual X, which basically every 4 copies or every 4 grade 1s you have in drop zone, your front row gets plus 10k. So you can use the Drag Abyss 1 turn, flip the call, and you have a field. And then if you need to go to a second time, you have the 3rd copy still. And that Ritual X is active. And it's GB3, I believe. And so that way you still get power benefits if you did get damage denial. Morpheus is similar, but this is basically just a weaker Morpheus attempt if you don't have the counterblast in that sense. So it helps with that regard too. And then you got the Bronak that lets you grab cards from the deck to guard with, like grade 1 specifically. So that helps with that ritual count. Ogma was interesting. I asked him, like, why did you bring Ogma into the picture? And it's really very specific to certain scenarios where he couldn't really effectively do Morfessa. And if his opponent's field was empty, he could at least take 5 cards from the opponent and then basically make it so that the next turn they can finish him. And so he will follow up with the following turn and actually do the complete turn of Morfessa or some other stride that he can do in that regard too. So Ogma is just very specific in those scenarios. So it wasn't like some big play that all of a sudden like we can do now, or big brain play kind of thing. But he had the room, he said, so he felt like that. Why not add Ogma just in case? We have Plotmaker over here at 2 copies. Ritual 3 plus 10k, just really solid G-Guard. Spectral Blaster Diablo is a restanding generic stride. So if you wanted to just have that Vanguard pressure, especially against matchups that lock up your front rows, such as like Chaos, right, in that sense, you can't do Morfessa the way you want to do it. And so why not just have a restanding Vanguard? And so that's where Spectral Blaster, where if you do have like 2 open circles in the back, at least you can retire 1 during the main phase, and then you can retire 2 during the battle phase to be able to do a restand and really just go from there. And then you have the Spectral Blaster Diablo. This guy, he's plus 10k in encrypt, flip a copy. People say it's for the Geese matchup. Some people say like if you catch your opponent off guard, they have no field, they can't guard from hand at that point. They have to rely on G Guardians. That's another way to like get around and get a win. Most times you're gonna do Morfessa anyway. So this is just like, I guess, a weaker Morfessa in a sense too. And then lastly, Subbreeze. It's just having that option, be able to Subbreeze an opponent too if you're playing that grade 2 game. And you can do stuff with Subbreeze. You know, the moment you stride, Luard skill can go active too. And then you have some GB1 cards, such as Dagda and other cards that may be like needing to be active. And in that case, you can have multi-attack. You can have some like more pressure. Because with the grade 3 Luard that you have, it doesn't do anything on its own. And if you're doing the grade 2 game, at that point, you need to write to the grade 3. Subbreeze might be that better option with given enough counterblast in that sense to really just go from there. So with that, that's really the deck profile in the sense with my experience and my thoughts and some of the interactions that he mentioned. And the biggest thing is this deck is very consistent. I think most people would agree with the different Luards. You would get more power, you would get more like big brain plays, you know, all that kind of stuff. What's really cool with Luard is that you're able to mix and match whatever Luards that you want to use. Some people play even 5-6 copies of Luards now just to help with that, but this is a 4 grade 3 Luard deck, as you can see, using the G Arrow 1 too as well. And just seeing him do so well is really cool. He's a good amigo too from the Chicagoland area, and also shout out to Card Fighters on the Ground too. It's just, he's a really good player, very chill player too, so who knows, maybe in the future I'll be able to face him too and we'll have a good match. Who knows, he might be playing Luard or he might be playing Overlord. I'm not so sure. And so with that, amigos, if you liked the video, give it a like. Comment down below, what are you guys' thoughts? Did you guys watch him play on the streams too? What are some things that you like about this deck? And what are some suggestions that you may try out for the next event? You know, I love to hear your feedback too, especially with Shadow Paladin too. I normally just do Raging Form, but Luard is something that I at least talk about since I face it enough. And at the same time, I have had a chance to interview awesome people like a Karan as well, and then also share it with a Shadow Paladin player or a Luard player. I'm sure they'll enjoy this video as well. And then again, if you want to read more into the interview article, it's in the description below too as well, so go ahead and check that out. And lastly, subscribe. See ya. Bye.